All right. Good morning, Adair. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to do this little chat with you. I'd love to start with just a little introduction of ourselves so that people know who we are. So we'll just begin with you. Please just tell us who you are and a little bit about what you do.
My name is Adair Anderson. I am a registered and licensed dietitian nutritionist with an undergraduate degree in biochemistry and a master's degree in clinical nutrition from Vassar University. I'm joining this podcast on behalf of Vibrant Wellness, where I work as a clinical lab educator. In that role, I provide consultations to healthcare providers, helping them interpret their patients' functional lab results and craft personalized treatment plans to promote health. I've probably reviewed hundreds of lab tests at this point. I also have a private practice called Eating with Integrity, where I solve digestive mysteries. And what I mean by that is I specialize in working with clients with gastrointestinal symptoms who have not yet gotten the support they need from other healthcare providers. I do that using functional lab testing to identify and then resolve those root cause issues.
What does Vibrant Labs do? What do they specialize in?
Yeah, so Vibrant Wellness is great at the functional lab testing. Certainly, we run your conventional, CBC or like a thyroid panel, but we also offer functional tests to really dive into the root cause. So the wheat zoomer looks at sensitivity to wheat and intestinal permeability pieces. The gut zoomer is going to look at all your microbes and the balance there, and if you're digesting or not. We've got also the total tox burden test, which actually includes 3 different tests: the environmental toxins, heavy metals, and mycotoxins test, to really get at your total toxic burden. Like, how much is your body having to get rid of these things in the environment?
Yeah, my favorite test. Yeah. Well, thank you for that little summary. Yeah, I'm actually, my master's degree is actually in Oriental medicine. So I'm a doctor of Oriental medicine. Technically, my license allows me to do lab work. And I don't practice Oriental medicine anymore. I haven't for years and years and years, because when I found functional medicine, I just never went back. And once I started doing, functional medicine lab work, that's all I wanted to do. And so it's really become my greatest passion, specifically the total tox burden testing, which we're going to dive into, specifically the environmental toxin piece, because, wow, these modern day times are just crazy. We're just exposed to so many chemicals everywhere. They're just everywhere, and an interesting tidbit is in 1994, the US actually released 2.2 billion pounds of chemicals into the environment. And then by 2000, I'm sorry, that was in 1994. By 2002, it was 4.7 billion pounds of chemicals. So, that number is just exponentially, it's just crazy how fast it grew. And the EPA has over 84,000 chemicals listed in their inventory, and that number keeps growing too. So it's scary. And most of these chemicals that the EPA has released have not been adequately tested on humans or their effect on the environment. So it's really important to remember that we're just, as humans, we're newly exposed to these chemicals that didn't exist 100 years ago, hence these epidemics of diseases, of everything from obesity to diabetes and Alzheimer's and autoimmune diseases and cancers. And it's just inflammatory diseases in general. It's beyond on the rise. It's just becoming the norm that we see our loved ones or ourselves face these diseases that didn't used to exist. So anyway, that brings me back to why we're doing this talk, to bring increased exposure to what functional medicine is and what it does, and how it can really enhance and improve your life and your health and your well-being. So I guess let's just start with, and to dive right in with, what exactly are environmental toxins? Just give us a little brief overview of that.
So broadly speaking, environmental toxins are substances that negatively impact health. And once inside the body, these chemical substances can cause damage to body tissues.
Right. And so where do you think these chemicals that we're exposed to nowadays, where do you think they accumulate in the body? And if so, do you think that certain chemicals have affinity towards different accumulating at different places in the body?
Absolutely. So really these toxins can accumulate everywhere. For example, acrylamide is rapidly distributed to all organs, including the brain, heart, liver, kidneys, and also found in breast milk. Benzene can get deposited in the bone marrow. In fact, human studies show benzene exposure can actually increase development of acute myeloid leukemia and other leukemias. But I mean, in general, most environmental toxins are fat soluble. Like, they don't mix well with water. So many end up getting stored in our fat tissues, really making it more difficult to lose weight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've definitely seen that. And so, I mean, in your opinion, then these chemicals are definitely influencing health and causing, unwanted symptoms. And there's a lot of correlation to, a high toxic burden with certain, disease states. Would you agree with that?
I do. Toxin exposure has been associated with many medical conditions, disease states. Common areas of concern include cancer, cardiovascular disease, neurological disorders, developmental disorders, immune dysfunction, hormonal imbalances, really a whole host of negative symptoms and health outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me, there's this, a YouTube influencer. She is a dermatologist named Dr. Dray, and she is an advocate and promotes millions of her followers to use these products, these toiletries and personal care products that are filled with some of the very toxins that we're discussing today that I'm so passionate about. And so I mention her just because, it's a classic example of sort of a dated paradigm of medicine, that didn't account for toxic looking at toxin burden in the body that's associated with certain symptoms and conditions, because science has really come a long way. There's so much that's come to light about the effect that toxins are having on the body. And so some of the information that she's spreading is really disheartening to me and scary, because she's influencing young women, in their 20s, 30s, even teens that are getting into skincare and want to do the best, in taking care of their skin that they can, and I remember being a teenager and starting to get interested in really taking care of my skin. So, it's huge that women want to take this step and with self-care, but it's just important to educate and know that there's sort of a whole new paradigm of medicine. There's been a real shift in the functional medicine world, moving away from some of these really dangerous, in my opinion, toxins. And so I wanted to mention that because I want to educate. I feel like I'm an educator. You're clearly an educator. And there's obviously different opinions on, things like parabens and phthalates and all this stuff that we're gonna dive into a little bit. So all that being said, talk to me about detoxification in general. What factors do you feel really influence one's ability to detox these chemicals? Because, Dr. Dray says we have a liver for a reason. And that statement really, really bothers me at my core, because what do you think about detoxification and one's ability to, does it vary from person to person? Have you found from your clinical experience?
Yeah, so absolutely, it varies. An individual's ability to detox chemicals is influenced by, one, the quantity of toxicant exposure. So the more exposure you have, the harder it is to get rid of it all. Also, the length of time exposed. If you've been exposed to these things your whole life, certainly that will have an impact. Genetic susceptibility. Some people just don't have the genetics, like they have genetic SNPs that make their detox enzymes not work as well, right?
I'm one of those people.
And then there's synergistic effects with other toxicants. And then certainly factors influencing detoxification pathways. For example, if someone is not good at having bowel movements regularly, that's going to prevent them from getting toxins out of the body, because that's one of the main ways we remove.
Right. And then they're just going to recirculate, right?
Yep.
Over and over and over.
That's right. If you don't get it out of your body's like, well, I got to do something with it.
Yep.
Let's store it in a fat cell.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, detoxification is obviously it's just such a huge topic, and gosh, we could probably geek out on it for hours. But if you could just give a brief overview to my audience about the different phases of detoxification, because not everybody knows that there's I mean, we hear that word all the time, right? It's used, gosh, in marketing everywhere these days. But what exactly is it? And tell me about the different phases, etc.
Yeah, so here is an overview of detoxification. So first you start with a fat soluble toxin. And since it doesn't mix with water, the body needs to turn it into something that is more water soluble in order to eliminate it through the urine or stool. So first you take this fat soluble toxin, you actually activate it and make it more toxic. I like to give the analogy of sort of like waking up a sleeping gremlin.
Mm-hmm.
And so it makes it more toxic. And then in phase 2, you take a big water soluble compound and stick it on top of the toxin, sort of like putting a gremlin in a box so the rest of the body can handle it, right? Like, yes, people, FedEx people walk around with boxes. They have no idea what's in that box. They're just delivering it, right? So once the gremlin's in a box, you can get rid of it through all the various detox channels. And then phase 3 is actually taking that in the urine, stool, bile, or sweat and removing it from the body. So that's your big picture how detox works.
Gotcha. Thank you. Yeah. And once again, gosh, I mean, I'm sure we could dive into the different phases for hours, but that is a brief overview. And there's so much information online if you want to, read more about those phases, but it is a process in the body to get rid of all this stuff. It's not just, boom, magically, we inhale these chemicals, or our largest organ is our skin. So we put all these lotions and push, and it's not just boom, the liver gets rid of it. It's really not that simple. It's so complex. And many people like myself do have SNPs and genetic mutate. I do not detox. It takes everything under the sun for my body to clear things. And that's a whole nother story that we won't get into, but I can personally attest to, being very, very sick for many, many years of my life. And then, slowly chipping away the pieces. And there's a lot of pieces. Toxins weren't all of it, but it was a big piece. So it is absolutely a factor that inhibits health, and there's absolutely ways to improve and get rid of these toxins if you have genetic, inabilities to really tackle it, like some people. And some people's just, their bodies work immaculately at ridding these toxins, and lucky them. But unfortunately, more and more people are chronically ill these days and facing real issues with detoxification, largely due to, epigenetics plays a huge part. We're going to touch on that later, but environmental factors hugely influence our ability to detox. Okay, that was a little bit of a tangent. Sorry. I get so passionate about detoxification, as I'm sure you do too. So let's talk about Vibrant Labs testing. Now that we're talking about passion, can you highlight, if you want to, I think you have a sample report of a Vibrant Labs test to show. And these are what Adair and I are working with every day with patients, and she's working with other practitioners. And so if you want to just kind of, give them the lay of the land and highlight anything that you feel really, stands out to you, and what things that you typically go straight to, if there are those things, or just the general categories that you can highlight for people.
Yeah, so here is the total tox burden report. First, we have the summary of everything that was high and also everything that was moderate. And this is actually going on to 2 pages. It's bad when you have 2 pages of toxins coming out.
Yep, which is common.
Yeah, it is so common.
Very common.
Mm-hmm. So high is anything over the 95th percentile. So you'll have the reference range over here, and certainly this mycotoxin is above the reference range, as indicated by the red. So it'll list all of the mycotoxins, all the heavy metals, all the environmental toxins that were elevated. And this is based on a urine sample. So we're seeing what is coming out in your urine. since urine is the easy way to measure what's coming out of the body. Then moderate is anything between the 95th or the 75th and 95th percentile. And after the summary page, then we go into also the individual tests. So it'll tell you high and moderate mycotoxins. Anything that's elevated, you'll get a comment to tell you where it comes from, to learn more.
And so mycotoxins are essentially molds, and Vibrant tests for foodborne molds, so foods that we're ingesting that might have behind molds, such as, nuts, dried fruit, cheeses, those kinds of things, moldy, breads that you didn't realize. So we test for both of those. I just had a patient test really high in 3 different black molds the other day. So this is a really important piece of the test. Not one that we're focusing on in this interview so much, but it's there.
Yeah. It's usually the raw agricultural commodity. So when you harvest wheat, for example, you store it, and if there's over 60% moisture, that moisture is going to invite molds to grow. And once certain molds grow, they will create mycotoxins. And once that mycotoxin is present in the food, it's hard to get rid of, even when you process it into flour and then make breads and cookies and cakes and like all these things. You could just, it's not that you're eating a moldy tortilla. It's the tortilla moldy before it's made.
Right. Yeah.
And then the next test is the heavy metals. So we're looking at a whole bunch of different metals that have negative impacts in the body in large amounts.
Interesting. This test shows, and we'll touch on this a little bit later, but I just want to point out, very high in aluminum.
Yep. We see that a lot.
We'll come back to that.
And then there's also the environmental toxins.
And this is the one that we're really talking about and focusing on today.
It is. Yep. So we've got volatile organic compounds, herbicides, parabens, phthalates.
Parabens, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Antibiotics. Those come up a lot as well. And that's what it looks like.
Such a fascinating test. This testing just didn't exist really just 10 years ago, not even to this level, probably 5 years ago, but definitely not 10 years ago. So, and it just keeps improving, so it's almost, at this point in the game, I feel like almost irresponsible for practitioners, doctors included, to not be aware of this type of testing and at least include it, in their regimen. So thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate it. And do you want to just touch on how, I know you said it's a urine test. Maybe just a few snippets on how exactly a Vibrant Labs test identifies these compounds?
So Vibrant's environmental toxins test, actually all of them, use urinary excretion of the toxins, and they measure it using mass spec. So for the environmental toxins, we use liquid chromatography. For heavy metals, it's inductively coupled plasma, or ICP. Essentially what we're doing is we're taking your urine sample and we're separating it out based on size. And then we're loading that into the mass spec machine, which measures down to the parts per quadrillion. So we can detect even tiny, 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 tiny amounts to see what actually is coming out of your body.
Yeah. Incredible cutting edge stuff. Okay. And so now that you've given us the overview of the testing, let's hone in on exposures to chemicals that we're getting exposed to via toiletries and personal care products. Because, we touched on aluminum a little bit with deodorant. But let's touch on just the specific chemicals that we're coming into contact just with your common everyday, unless you're obviously, using everything from Whole Foods, but just your run of the mill, if you go to the, grocery store, Walgreens, Walmart, whatever, all those products, what chemicals are we being exposed to in those products?
So the most common toxins found in personal care products are parabens, phthalates, xylene, triclosan, and benzene. So to dive into a little bit more about each of these, and forgive the chemical structures here. I love the chemistry of it. So
That's great.
for parabens, they're all very similar but different. And these are found in things like cosmetics, shampoo, lipsticks, lip liner, mascara. I mean, they're preservatives, right? So you don't want your body care products to mold or have bacteria growing in them. So that's what they're used for. But it just means you're also getting exposed to them as well. So all of these things certainly can contain parabens.
Yeah. And also specifically, we saw in that other slide that person was really high in aluminum. Where do you think the aluminum's coming from specifically? And do you think that aluminum is toxic?
Yeah. Let me get to the right slide.
No problem.
So yeah, aluminum is most found in deodorant. We use aluminum in deodorant as an antiperspirant, and like goes into your pores, into your sweat ducts, and blocks them. Probably not explaining that quite accurately, but something like this. And although aluminum is effective at helping stop sweating, it's also a heavy metal that your body does not need. And it actually has lots of problems if you have too much of it. So early symptoms include headaches, dryness of skin and mucous membranes, tendency for colds, heartburn. It can eventually lead to muscular conditions, loss of memory, mental confusion. And it's also been associated with things like Alzheimer's disease, breast cancer, osteoporosis, and autism spectrum disorder. So not a great thing to have in large amounts.
No, not at all. And if we're constantly using conventional deodorant, then we're just constantly getting doses of the aluminum, which clearly our liver is not getting rid of. It's doing an adequate job for a lot of people because we're finding it so high in the testing. I've seen, I would say more than half the people I've tested are high in aluminum. So it's just something that I really wanted to point out. The other thing that I can't wait to touch on is sunscreen. Because, once again, this influencer that I mentioned before is wow, her obsession with sunscreen goes beyond anything I've ever seen. It frightens me, honestly, because, well, first and foremost, tell me about the toxins, the most, common toxins that are found in sunscreen.
So the most common toxins found in sunscreens are parabens, oxybenzone, and benzene.
Correct. Yes. Which she also says parabens are fine. But how do you think that these chemicals, specifically parabens, are impacting people?
So in vitro and limited in vivo studies show that parabens have weak estrogenic activity. So it acts just like estrogen in your body, which may induce the growth of human breast cancer cells.
Yes.
And may also influence the expression of estrogen-dependent genes. Additionally, in children, paraben exposure has actually been associated with increased prevalence of atopic dermatitis and some evidence of increased risk of asthma as well.
Yes, I've seen several cases and read some studies with the correlation between children and asthma, and mothers are just constantly painting their kids with all these sunscreens, and more children are using inhalers these days. You see it all the time. And then I've also read some studies that show some correlation between parabens and fertility issues, right? Fertility rates. And all the studies that Adair was so kind to put in this webinar, I'm going to link those in the description below. And also I'll probably add a few of mine, just so that if anybody wants to dive into those, they have access to those. But parabens are, they're a real threat right now. They're in everything. We're constantly being exposed. I see them high in probably 75% of the people that I'm working with. And, we start clearing some of this crap with certain detoxification protocols that Adair and I are most functional practitioners use, including, dietary detoxification protocols, including, supplements that are binders that include ingredients like clays and charcoals and zeolites and humic and fulvic acids and all these things that actually bind to the toxins to draw them out of the body. So it's absolutely possible. It's harder to get these things out of the body in people that have these genetic SNPs and detoxification problems or issues, but you absolutely can. It just takes a little bit more finessing and opening up the drainage pathways with things like biosalts and TUDCAs, things like this. Just to give throw in a little dose of inspiration in the midst of this, that even if you do have a high toxic burden, which the majority of us do, there's ways to get them out of the body. It's not just, oh, you have them, you're stuck with them forever. Now you have to be intentional about it. But there are ways. So sunscreen. Yeah. I mean, do you think we should be, as humans, just wearing sunscreen all the time, just around the house, even if we don't go out of the house? Do you think we should just be painted like a glazed donut all the time with sunscreen? I mean, is that normal? Or I don't even say this that normal, because I guess to normal is that healthy in your opinion?
That's a great question. So I do think it behooves us to reduce unnecessary exposure to toxic chemicals. And certainly sunscreen is one of those places, especially if you're not getting a zinc sunscreen, right? You're getting exposed to more chemical. And personally, I'd rather my body spend the energy repairing damaged tissue, cells, DNA, than waste energy trying to get rid of excess toxins.
Exactly. Yes. Because your body only has so much energy to put towards, so much ATP to tackle things.
Mm-hmm. I like to think of toxic burden like a tub. So we have this tub full of toxins, and certainly we want to reduce how much toxins coming into a tub, right? In the upper left-hand corner here, we want to reduce how much is coming in. And then we want to support the drainage pathway. We want to get them out. So letting the water go out through the drain, we want to support that going as fast as possible because we don't want it to overflow, right?
Right.
If we have too many toxins, then that leads to issues within the body, dysregulation. The body doesn't have enough energy to deal with everything else. It's like, I'm so busy getting rid of toxins, I can't possibly repair your muscles. So good luck with your athletic performance.
Right. Yeah.
Good luck making a baby if we know that you're super toxic. That's never going to happen, right?
Very true. Very true.
And as a side note here, there are lots of sunscreen alternatives. I have a friend whose mom survived skin cancer. And she's always biking in a long sleeve jersey and leg coverings all summer long, even here in Idaho where it's really hot. Because she just knows that's the best choice for her, and she hates sunscreen. She's like, ugh. So there's ways to cover up. You don't have to use sunscreen as the only way to prevent from sun.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, also, I think it's important do you think as humans don't we need X amount of sun for all kinds of synthesis that take place in the body, for neurotransmitter, serotonin, all kinds of. Do you feel like we need certain sun exposure and UV rays in the absence of sunscreen to stay healthy?
I love sun. Absolutely. Absolutely. You can make vitamin D from the sun. There's a schematic here on the right side of the screen. When UV rays from the sun hits the 7-dehydrocholesterol, forgive the science speak for anyone who doesn't love that, in your skin, it actually gets converted into activated vitamin D, right? Goes through a process. It hits the liver and also the kidneys to become activated and becomes a hormone. But yeah, you can make vitamin D from sun exposure. The 2019 article that actually dove into how much sun we need for this. In the spring and summer with 22% of uncovered skin, you take 1,000 IUs of vitamin D in 10 to 15 minutes of sun exposure. At least this is for Swiss adults. So of course it's dependent upon where you are in the world, if you're at the equator or closer to the poles. But certainly a small amount of sun exposure is going to help you make your daily dose of vitamin D.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously we're not talking about going out and getting burned, right?
Right.
We're not talking about laying out on the decks. Like I know, gosh, when I was a teenager, I just can't even believe, but that was just the normal thing. You go out on a deck with your mineral oil, your baby oil, and fry. So we're not talking about that, but some sun exposure, a little bit a day without sunscreen is important. And there's so much that we don't even know. In my belief, that there's so much we don't even know about what we're getting from the sun, what we're getting from the trees, just hiking, just being around plants, I mean, there's so much that we just don't even understand yet. But we are supposed to, as humans, be exposed to these things, in healthy amounts, in healthy levels. Our neurotransmitter function absolutely is largely, dependent on also being exposed to these things, staying happy, essentially. We're not supposed to look gray. We're not supposed to look gray and washed out. We're just not. It's just not. It's not a healthy look. So I'm glad that we touched on that. We're not supposed to look like a glazed donut 24/7 from sunscreen. That's just ridiculous. And so you showed the studies about the parabens. What else? We want to talk about the skin microbiome disruption. If you want to just touch on that a little bit.
Yeah. So the skin microbiome, it's fascinating research is being done still in the microbiome. We've got microbes living in and on us, and they outnumber us 10 to 1 if you're thinking about just cells, and then genetics, like even bigger than that. And they live everywhere, including our skin. And there's actually more similarity between your elbow microbes and my elbow microbes than your elbow microbes and like things living, in your nose, for example. So it's very site specific. Every microbe is going to use a different type of energy. So the ones living in like the sebaceous glands of your skin, like your hair, are going to be a different type of microbe than the ones living in a dry space like your knee. And they have a very tight-knit ecosystem, right? They're there because that ecosystem allows them to live there. And when we put different products on our skin, it can disrupt that microbiome balance. It can disrupt that ecosystem.
Yes, absolutely. And I think sometimes in a profound way, we're slathering sunscreen all over us all the time, or other, toxic toiletry skincare products. We really are disrupting that balance on the skin. That is there for a reason, that also protects us. It's a huge part of our immune system, right? As well. I mean, the disruption is, it's endless. I mean, it's, once again, this is a whole webinar in and of itself, the skin microbiome. There is so much information just coming to light on it. And it's just a fascinating topic, and we're just giving such a brief overview of it. But wow, I mean, it's a real thing that we're really, really disrupting in these modern day times. So in the last 40 years, this is an interesting little fact as well. Male fertility rates have decreased by 40%. That's just huge. I mean, that's just an astronomical number. 40% in the last 40 years. What do you attribute that to? I mean, do you feel like there's a correlation to environmental toxin exposure with male fertility rates?
I do. In the last 40 years, they do. They have decreased. I found this study that says, quote, exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals may result in oxidative stress and endocrine system disturbances, which can have an impact on human reproduction and development. In the male reproductive health specifically, it's been related to impaired reproductive function, male infertility, altered fetal development, testicular germ cell, prostate, and breast cancers.
Yeah. Wow. And I know you just briefly mentioned oxidative stress, which, once again, huge topic that I'm so fascinated with. But oxidative stress in a nutshell is really kind of the crux of what we're really talking about as when we're talking about the environmental toxin or the tox burden testing in general. What is oxidative stress? Why are these toxins causing oxidative stress?
So to quote the article here, oxidative stress is a phenomenon caused by an imbalance between the production and accumulation of these reactive oxygen species, basically like free radicals in the cells and tissues, and the ability of the biological system to detoxify these products. So it's really a balancing act. Yep. Certainly even the process of digestion, when you're breaking down food into smaller pieces, that's creating some of these free radicals, reactive oxygen species. It's a chemical reaction. You're breaking bonds. It's like a small explosion every time you eat. And your body is amazing. It has a way to quench that, to have antioxidants you're naturally making your liver, like glutathione. But your liver can only do so much. Actually, let me go back to a different slide that I think will help emphasize this.
Yeah.
So here we are. So certainly when we're eating, it's creating these reactive oxygen species, and the body makes enough glutathione and all these antioxidant supports to help prevent that from damaging your liver, damaging your cells. But when you have a really high toxic burden, that means the liver is having to use up all of this glutathione, use up all your vitamin A, all your vitamin C, all your vitamin E, all your N-acetylcysteine, all of your CoQ10, trying to get rid of these toxins without having the toxins damage your body cells. And then that's where you have this dysregulation in disease pathways, because your body just can't keep up with it, right? It's sort of like you can only do so much work in an 8-hour day. And if your boss gives you enough work to do in a 10-hour day or a 20-hour day, yes, we still have 20 hours in a day, like, and you're only sleeping 4 hours, like, of course you're going to get burnt out and tired, and things are going to get not done as well. And it's going to be overwhelming, and you're going to end up with problems.
Yeah, right. Not to mention how many people these days, including myself, have a glutathione deficiency. So I don't, glutathione is, what's responsible for helping you, largely responsible for detoxification. And if you're deficient in it, then you just can't get rid of this stuff. And you can probably, I've tried, you can take all the glutathione under the sun, but if you're not taking care of this piece and 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 this, then just taking glutathione is not really going to do much. Now, it can absolutely be supportive, but my point is just that many of us just don't even naturally have adequate amounts of glutathione to do the work, to do the job adequately. So we're just exposure to all these chemicals, and the cup just overfloweth, and eventually after the cup overfloweth, it reaches the tipping point, and the tipping point is illness, or at least unwanted symptoms, of not fatigue, fibromyalgia, any sort of inflammatory issues, the list is endless, right? Skin issues all the time. I see skin issues associated with a high toxic burden. So yeah, well, thanks for that explanation. It was great that we touched on glutathione. I didn't think to touch on that earlier. So yeah, male fertility rates have plummeted, and absolutely a correlation between environmental toxin exposure. So, to kind of, we're going to begin wrapping up, and to kind of end on a positive note. There's over 200,000 MDs practicing functional medicine right now. I got certified, next to 2,000 MDs, and got certified in functional medicine. And that number just keeps growing and growing and growing. And that's just MDs. So about 20% of MDs practicing a new type of medicine. And then, thousands upon thousands upon thousands more of practitioners like yourself and I, that are also going in a new direction. And that's really inspiring, and it's really promising, because functional medicine is really interested in the root cause of disease, which I know you mentioned earlier. So it's really doing away with this Band-Aid approach of take this drug for this symptom. It's really getting away from just a very dated form of medicine, and going into a new, what's called systems biology approach to medicine. And I think, I could speak for most functional medicine practitioners, is that they largely believe that most diseases and most unwanted symptoms are largely due to environmental toxin exposure. So many, more and more and more now they're finding, oh, this disease is attributed to, this toxin, or this disease is attributed to this bacteria overgrowth, and this disease is actually the correlation is, vitamin B deficiency, whatever. The list is endless, but it's no longer just, we have no idea where this disease comes from. I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis at age 15 and was hospitalized on and off for 15 years, living on steroids and lots of other fun drugs, bedridden, and lost a large part of my life. And I can honestly say, if I would have listened to the conventional doctors, I would not have a colon right now. And not only would I not have because they wanted to just yank it out, I don't know how many times. Not only would I not have a colon, I'd be in bed sick. And that's just the truth. And that's why I'm so passionate about these things. And there were absolutely environmental toxin exposures that were, influencing the expression. And that's a whole nother, we won't even go there. But some of that, my story and what the root cause of my disease is on my website. But, these toxins are absolutely played a part in my illness. It wasn't everything, but you have to address, once again, all the pieces of the puzzle. I don't believe my disease is autoimmune. I think that label is thrown around in a ridiculous way. There have been so many quote unquote autoimmune diseases that have been proven to have a root cause, that it's not a mystery. Oh, the immune system is just attacking itself. And obviously there's a time and a place for that phrase, and not diagnose, the autoimmune. But we just have to think bigger now. It's a new era, it's a new time, and we really have to think out of the box, with these labels of diseases. And I think one of the best ways to look out of the box with these conditions is this testing, through Vibrant Labs. There's also, obviously there's other labs. Vibrant's by far and away my favorite for so many reasons. This testing it's a blessing. I don't even know what else to call it, because I've seen this testing change lives, and like I said before, this didn't exist like 10 years ago. So I get so excited about it. And so I'm so glad we got to chat about it. But, how do you think that this more cutting edge approach to medicine, actually, I guess we did touch on it, but obviously you believe that it has the ability to prevent disease and symptoms and often resolve. Is there a case that stands out to you in your clinical experience, you working with people, where you just saw transformation? You did labs, you found a really high toxic load, you worked on it, and then you witnessed, a different road for that patient or person?
Yeah. So I had a client a few years ago who really wanted to get pregnant. And, she knew she had some pretty intense exposure in her youth and in recent years. And so we immediately ran the total tox burden test and identified, she had some heavy metals. She definitely had some environmental toxins. And so we did a protocol to get rid of all of these things. And once we completed that protocol, she was able to successfully get pregnant and give birth to a really healthy baby girl, which is amazing.
I hear those stories specifically about fertility all the time through Vibrant and through colleagues and reps and I mean, all the time. So it's almost just a given that not only are male fertility rates down by 40%, which is an astounding number, but women are great. Their fertility is really impacted by exposure to these toxins. You see it every day. More and more women can't get pregnant. I mean, it's a real struggle. It's a real struggle. So I'm glad you shared that story, because I hear that story over and over and over and over again. And I never get bored hearing it because it's so exciting. And you redo the labs every 6 months, and you watch the numbers go down. You can see it. You see it before your very eyes. You watch us clear the parabens and the phthalates and the herbicides and the pesticides and the molds and the heavy metals. And then they get pregnant, or then their skin, their eczema or psoriasis goes away. Or, the one of the things that brings me to the most joy to witness is the depression goes away, the anxiety goes away, and the increased energy. All of a sudden they're like, I'm exercising. I can't believe it. I haven't had the energy to exercise in 10 years, and it's such a victory, and I think from someone who was, I chronically ill for so long, I'm so grateful for Vibrant. I'm so grateful for educators like you, for helping bring awareness and educate, because we need so many more used. We need so many more used with a scientific background that can have fluid, articulate conversation, about this stuff with, all the other professionals out there that maybe just aren't aware. Sometimes it's not even necessarily their fault. They just haven't been exposed. Or some of them just want to kind of slam the door and not look at it. And that's fine, because I think in time, the new generations will, this will be more and more the norm, is no, you can't use these products and if you want to really, maintain optimal health. You have to go out of your way to seek the natural alternatives, in my opinion. You have to, it's a responsibility that we now have to take, because we have no choice. We walk out the door and we're exposed. Or, I mean, we get new furniture and we're exposed. We move into a new house, or we're exposed. We get into our cars, we're exposed. You go to an airport, you wash your hand. I mean, sometimes it's inevitable. We're exposed, so we do the best we can. Right. But I think you and I are on the same trajectory and really trying to, in essence, change the world, and I think that that's amazing. So I really appreciate you and your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just now really, it's been a huge learning curve the last few years for me to learn these labs and really educate myself. It's been a huge learning curve doing labs in general. And Adair has so much more experience with it than I do. And she comes from a much more scientific background. So she was really the best person to speak, about Vibrance testing and to take the deeper dive. So thanks for helping me and supporting me on this process of learning as much as I can about it.
Absolutely. Happy to be here and support in any way, because the more we have the knowledge and understanding, the more we can make evidence-based decisions that's not influenced by influencers or what we're marketed, but we can make decisions that are going to be best for our body.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Adair.
You're so welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye.